So scientists have just discovered something that could change how we think about aging, death, and what it means to be human. So what we're going to talk about today is what psilocybin, the active alkaloid in magic mushrooms, reveals about death and consciousness. And this is inspired by a recent clinical trial that was published when mice were exposed to high doses of psilocybin and the effect that it had on cellular longevity. And what we're going to talk in more detail about is why cellular longevity may be a byproduct of consciousness expansion and what impact psychedelics have in that context. So this study came out just a few weeks ago now. It showed a plus 51% cellular lifespan in human fibroblasts that were treated with psilocybin. There was an 80% survival rate versus a 50% control in aged mice for those who were exposed to psilocybin. They noticed that with the mice that were exposed to psilocybin, there were preserved telomeres, which are the cellular markings of aging, and enhanced DNA repair and overall reduced oxidative stress. What does this reveal about the nature of consciousness and identity? That physical longevity may be a byproduct of expanded consciousness, not the goal itself. So just to come back to this, what we learned about is that this isn't just about living longer. It's about what happens when we expand beyond our limited sense of self. And so when I saw this research, I realized we're looking at something much deeper than anti-aging. Cellular renewal parallels consciousness expansion. DNA repair mirrors psychological integration. Oxidative stress reduction reflects ego dissolution, and telomere preservation suggests timeless awareness. The things that psilocybin and psychedelics can do as it relates to time are super interesting. Now, psilocybin may be starting to show us a biological mechanism behind mystical truth. The ancient Greeks said, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. They knew something that we are just rediscovering. True immortality is not about physiology. It is not about the body. What dying before you die really means is that you're able to release your attachment to ego and the limited identity of your personality, that you're able to recognize that in this experience of transcendence that is so often facilitated with high doses of mushrooms or generally psychedelics, that there is consciousness beyond form. It also helps us to recognize that there is present moment awareness, that we can live beyond this constricting fear of death, which is what we're going to talk quite a bit more. And finally, this sense of universal connection, understanding our interconnected nature, because every profound psychedelic experience teaches the same lesson. You are not who you think you are. And it's why biohackers like Brian Johnson, who is a friend, someone that I respect deeply, but I fear that a lot of these biohackers who are obsessed with longevity and living as long as possible are missing the point. The current longevity focus is how can I live as long as possible, extending lifespan through technology, optimizing biology for performance. Let's get those mitochondria to be healthier. Let's ensure that we can initiate autophagy through fasting. Let's make sure we defeat aging as an enemy and preserve our personality or ego indefinitely. I think the psychedelic perspective is much more rich. It's the quality of consciousness over quantity of years. I mean, this is why we talk a lot about health span rather than lifespan. I think we need to go something beyond just health span and really talk about the capacity to be cognizant for as long as possible. This notion of expanded identity beyond just individual survival. I really think there is something very wise about the work that psychedelics facilitate in helping us to recognize the power of elderhood, how aging is really a teacher rather than an enemy, and death is transformation. It's not termination. I was at a dinner party the other night and I asked everyone, if you could be immortal, would you choose to be immortal? And where we landed was, Well, in many ways, we already are, because even when we die, we are reborn. And we are reborn in simply a new form. This is what the Buddhists have always talked about, with this sense of karma, with this sense of reincarnation, right? It is simply the next unknown. And that reflects this sort of fractal nature of renewal. Psilocybin doesn't just repair cells like we saw in this mice model research. It actually repairs our relationship with existence itself. That choice expansion at the consciousness level creates cellular regeneration at the biological level. When we feel like we can expand into greater choice and greater freedom, we actually see how that impacts our cells. Bruce Lipton, an incredible doctor, first talked about this in The Biology of Belief, that you could see that when someone changed how they believed, it actually could change things at a cellular level. And I mean, I've watched people's faces literally change after deep psychedelic work. You've probably seen this too. It's like they've been renewed from the inside out. So this pattern recognition, going back to what we were talking about before, the sort of fractal nature of renewal, cellular senescence, right, is similar to psychological rigidity. We have to be able to let the old thoughts and old beliefs die for new cells to be reborn. DNA damage is related to traumatic conditioning. Oxidative stress is related to the mental resistance. And telomere shortening is simply disconnection from source, God, oneness, the mystery. When we feel deeply connected at every cell of our being to something greater than ourselves, we know this helps us to live more fully, because the fundamental truth is that the fear of death accelerates aging. We know that people with higher meaning and purpose show longer telomeres and better health outcomes. And the people I know who have faced death, confronted the fundamental reality of death through psychedelics, seem to age differently, like they've made peace with time itself. Fear of death leads to chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to cellular damage. Cellular damage leads to accelerated aging, which then leads to more fear. Fear, the constriction, the fear of death is the greatest taboo that we have as a Western industrial culture. It's why we spend, I think, something like 80% of our healthcare costs are to keep people alive for the last 6 months, even if their quality of life is shit. And so what psilocybin helps to do is it interrupts this ego dissolution. It breaks our fear of non-existence. It opens us up into a mystical experience, revealing consciousness beyond any sort of physical form. It allows us to be present with each and every moment as it emerges, transcending time-based anxiety, and it allows us to experience this sense of universal love. There's a reason this has become a cliche. There's a reason that the Beatles said, all you need is love, because they were doing a lot of LSD, hint, hint. And this experience, this felt experience in every cell and muscle and part of your body, it helps to dissolve the existential isolation that we all face. So what we're actually seeking, one, we've heard about this from folks like Brian Johnson and Don't Die, biological immortality. Extending the physical body indefinitely. That is the current focus of the longevity movement. Can I live till I'm 120? What about 150? What about 200? And within that, there really is what I would consider to be a fear-based preservation of ego. There's not really an ability to root oneself in ancient wisdom traditions and recognize that all life will continue to cycle into new ways, and being that death is really necessary for things not to become stagnant or ossified. Level 2 is legacy immortality. The living on through impact and memory. I'm going to build this business. I want this street or this building to be named after me. I want to have this impact in the world around me. This is living on through impact and memory. I'd say this has evolved from strictly biological immortality, but it's still about ego expansion through achievement. I mean, how much more ego-driven can you be to say, I just want people to remember me after I'm dead, even though I won't be here anymore, and really won't care if people remember me or not. But in the present moment, when we're doing our everyday work and living our everyday life, it can be a motivating factor. It can be an incentive, this notion of legacy. And I find it especially with men. And I've struggled with this myself, this notion of remaining immortal through legacy. And then we have consciousness immortality, which is the recognition of timeless awareness, non-duality, unity with universal consciousness, and ego transcendence through direct experience. I think many of us are actually seeking level 3. And we're looking at level 1 and level 2 as cheap substitutes for level 3. Now, why does this research matter for daily life? Well, when you've experienced your own non-existence and found that you're still there, everything changes. You can live from an expanded identity rather than ego survival. You can make decisions from a place of expansion and love rather than this restricted fear of death. You can age gracefully by embracing rather than resisting change, and you can find purpose in service beyond the preservation of your individual ego. And so what that means on a practical level is you have less anxiety about aging and death. There's more focus on present moment quality, the qualitative nature of existence. There's a greater willingness to take meaningful risks because what's the absolute worst thing that could happen? You die? Well, I mean, don't be stupid, of course, but most reasons we fail to take risks are because we're scared of how it'll impact our ego and identity. And so if that's more porous, we can be more risk-taking with how it is that we live. And finally, there's a deeper appreciation for the miracle of human existence, for what it is to live, to fully live, and to be part of that experience. And the fundamental truth is, when we stop fearing death as a society, when we transcend that fear, our lives would look completely different. Authentic expression without fear of judgment, risk-taking for meaningful growth, deep relationships without fear of loss, creative flow beyond performance anxiety, but more importantly, environmental healing, that we care for future generations. Indigenous people say we look at 7 generations from now, not 7 years from now. Social justice, acting beyond personal safety, a spiritual renaissance, returning to meaning and purpose. And finally, the skillful wielding of technology, having technological wisdom so we can use these tools for consciousness expansion rather than escape. Because the most vibrant elders I know all share one thing, that they've made peace with their mortality. The more we accept death, the more alive we become. We can release control, accept impermanence, embrace change, and surrender our ego. And the research supports this. It shows that meditation practitioners and those with spiritual practices have longer telomeres, better immune function, lower inflammation, and enhanced DNA repair. Sometimes we just need a really high dose of mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca or any other psychedelics to help us recognize this truth and this state. Because we're not trying to live forever. We're learning to live as if we already are eternal. Stuart Brand, who started the Whole Earth catalog, was a legend. I mean, still is a legend. This dude is still alive. Said, we are as gods, so we might as well get good at it, right? And so this emerging paradigm of psychedelics as consciousness, expanding tools, longevity as a byproduct of that awareness expansion, aging as a spiritual practice, and death as transformation. We must embrace death as transformative rather than something to fear and push away. Because if we can do that, we can have humans who age with wisdom rather than fear, societies built on love and abundance rather than survival, technology guided by awareness and consciousness rather than the constricted ego, and medicine that heals the soul along with the body. Because what would you do if you weren't afraid to die? How can you live from the consciousness of immortality while embracing the gift of mortality? Can you live fully knowing you will die, or die fully knowing you will live? And I'd encourage you to drop a comment below. What would change in your life if you truly weren't afraid of death? How would you love differently? What risks would you take? How would you create differently? And what legacy would you focus on? What is your role in humanity's next chapter? Be part of the generation that transcends the fear of death through the skillful application of psychedelic medicine, because the opportunity is here. Personal integration, relational healing, creative expression, being in service to a greater mission. And the methods are just waiting to be utilized. Psychedelics, meditation and contemplative practices, meditations on mortality, service to something greater than personal survival. We must learn how to live as immortal consciousness in mortal form, because the secret to immortality is not avoiding death. It's discovering what in you was never born and can never die. We are eternal consciousness, having a temporary human experience. We must honor both the timeless and time-bound aspects, live fully present while planning wisely, love deeply while accepting impermanence, and create boldly while embracing endings. We must embrace the paradox of what it means to be spiritual beings in physical form. And so if this perspective shifted something for you, I'd encourage you to hit subscribe and share your insights below. The conversation about consciousness and mortality is just beginning. Thank you.